Penguin Random House Audio presents The Lie Detectives, in search of a playbook for winning elections in the disinformation age, by Sasha Issenberg. Read for you by Sean Patrick Hopkins. To my daughter, Maximilia Luda Eisenberg, may you live in less interesting times. Someone is wrong on the internet. In the fall of 2012, I published a book entitled The Victory Lab: The Secret Science of Winning Campaigns. It covered what I considered a scientific revolution that had taken place largely out of sight across American electoral politics over the first decade of the new century. Two twin strands of innovation: an influx of new data and statistical modeling techniques to profile individual voters, and the use of randomized controlled trials to test the effectiveness of campaign tactics, had emerged, informed by methods borrowed from consumer finance and the social sciences. Together, they dramatically expanded the toolbox of campaign operatives and forced them to rethink many of their assumptions about how to know what worked. When I was on tour promoting the book, I noticed that I repeatedly faced a version of the same question from readers and interviewers. I had just described all the state-of-the-art methods that had been developed for identifying and targeting individual voters, and for measuring what actually worked in trying to persuade and motivate them. I had explained how candidates, party organizations, labor unions, and political action committees were using them to make campaigns more efficient and effective. So, the question would go, what are the scoundrels doing with this knowledge? I too had often asked this during the 2 years I spent reporting on the subculture of self-described geeks who had begun to change the way electoral politics worked in the United States. Tea Party groups had begun to raise alarms about alleged instances of voter fraud in Barack Obama's election. In 2010, they became more aggressive in efforts to confront it. Yet I did not uncover much in the way of innovation in how activists used speeches to promote myths of illegal voters being trafficked from state to state. Might as well be Harry Potter's invisible night bus because no one can prove it exists, wrote the New York Times. Or dispatch unauthorized election observers to surveil polling places in minority neighborhoods. These were disturbing instances of misinformation and intimidation that could possibly qualify as voter suppression. But compared to what I saw from the social psychologists developing sophisticated statistical models to predict voter behavior, I was struck by how refreshingly old-fashioned it all was. That changed for me in October 2016, when, along with my Bloomberg colleague Josh Green, I traveled to San Antonio to spend a few days with Donald Trump's digital operation for what became a Businessweek cover story. What many readers found the most newsworthy was a quote we attributed to a senior campaign official. "We have 3 major voter suppression operations underway." One campaign aide showed a series of animated digital ads designed to depress support for Hillary Clinton among black voters, young women, and idealistic liberals. We were informed they would be delivered as Facebook dark posts, so that they could not be seen by anyone other than those to whom the campaign paid to show them. "We know because we've modeled this," the official told us. "It will dramatically affect her ability to turn these people out." It was the first time I had encountered someone who spoke the language of modern, data-driven campaigning to describe activities one might consider anti-democratic. To be fair, I was skeptical that they were actually doing exactly what they said they were, because senior Trump advisors had proven themselves to be liars who reveled in bluster and shock. There had been good structural explanations for why this type of activity had remained lo-fi, even as other areas of campaigning grew high-tech. A lot of the groundbreaking research was conducted in academic settings, where human subjects review boards and other ethical restrictions ruled out nefarious intentions, and most of the pioneering fieldwork was done by charitable organizations whose nonprofit status was tied to their focus on mobilizing historically underrepresented communities. Every legitimate political communicator would fear the blowback from association with practices that the media and their professional peers would consider unethical. Even if one did not, Just about every campaign already struggles with the problem of not having enough money or manpower to reach all of their own potential supporters. They would never prioritize trying to interact with the opposition. But Trump was not constrained by shame, ethics, or the traditional strategic imperatives of political campaigns. Overseas governments, intelligence services, foreign businesses, and domestic extremists, and some entities working at their nebulous overlap, certainly were not either. To them, the Internet had established many new avenues for participation in American elections, some illegal and some merely unethical, with no obvious precursors in the era of television ads, direct mail, and door-knocking volunteers to move voters. I thought back often to that conversation with the Trump official in the years that followed, as I observed so much else online that was manufactured and perpetuated with a similarly brazen impunity. Often what proved influential in ways previously unimaginable were not complex gambits to suppress the opposition vote, but straightforward lies to change voters' minds about candidates. The durability of those lies posed an imminent threat to democratic societies, disintegrating any sense of shared truth. As individual falsehoods began to inform full-blown conspiracy theories, from the imagined child sex trafficking ring at the heart of QAnon to the supposed plot to corrupt Brazil's electronic voting system, misbelief generated adherents who felt moved not only to whisper down the lane, but take to the streets fully armed. An existential crisis for the future of democracy was also an hourly test for those who wanted to win elections. Lies have likely been part of political conflict for as long as either existed. In the United States' first competitive presidential election in 1800, Vice President Thomas Jefferson was targeted by unsubstantiated rumors on a range of topics, most notably his supposed lack of Christian beliefs and a rumored sexual relationship he had with a woman he enslaved. In the late 20th century, historians reached consensus that Jefferson had indeed fathered at least one child with Sally Hemings. The primary vector for these were more than 100 typically signed pamphlets and an uncountable number of articles, guest editorials, and letters to the editor across Federalist-allied newspapers. Because those who had disseminated the attacks were identifiable political actors, Jefferson's backers could respond. To the slanders against Jefferson, the Republicans answered in kind. It is one of the most discouraging aspects of our politics that smears invite counter-smears, with honors as to scurrility and inventiveness about equally divided between radical and conservative propagandists, and the assaults on the virtue and integrity of the candidates in that election have never been surpassed either in their ferocity or in their departure from the truth, wrote historian Charles O. Lurch. The most heavily mythologized modern electoral disinformation in the analog era against Republican presidential candidate John McCain ahead of the 2000 South Carolina primary touched on the same themes. Christian coalition leaflets delivered by mail portrayed McCain as a godless heathen, and anonymous phone calls masquerading as surveys reportedly informed voters that his dark-skinned child had been born out of wedlock. She had, in fact, been adopted from an orphanage in Bangladesh. McCain, too, could respond to those he believed had wronged him. He even made his rejoinder to Christian Coalition founder Pat Robertson, among a pair of evangelical leaders whom McCain called agents of intolerance, a central theme of his campaign in its final weeks. No American law requires speakers to always be honest, but in the years between Jefferson and McCain, the economics of mass communication worked against those who would attempt to use lies for electoral advantage. To launch something untrue effectively required real resources in the form of a media outlet, phone bank, or direct mail fulfillment house, typically in geographical proximity to the people whom they intended to reach. Modern campaign finance regulations required anyone seeking to influence a federal election to report their spending and label their communications with a paid-for line. Even political consultants who claim they would do anything to win are chastened by the threat of prison. People or institutions with the capacity to reach large audiences typically determined that the cost of being labeled a liar outweighed the strategic benefit.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?